Alright, welcome back. So in this video, we're going to address the problem that I mentioned in the last video, which is that right now we're using one database between our local Cloud9 development environment and our production environment on Heroku. So our deployed code is using the same database that our testing ground is, which is really not a great idea. Things work fine. It's not a problem in the sense that our code is broken or that we can't get by using this way, but it's really not a good practice because we don't want to have one database where, if we have a big application, we have our main database with all of our users that's deployed. We don't want to be testing things and screwing around and adding new features, accidentally deleting entries in the database or deleting the entire database in our development environment. So you want to keep those separate. And just to demonstrate right now what we have going on, I have, remember that what we did is we updated our code rather than using the localhost YelpCamp v10 or whatever database URL you had there, but the local version on Cloud9, we updated it to be Mongo Lab. And this is our Mongo Lab instance, and it's the same one. We have this running locally right now and on Heroku. So I'll just refresh the page on both. This is a Heroku deploy. As you can see, we have one Rodeo Beach and we have Rodeo Beach again. Just to prove that they are connected, of course, let's add a new campground over here. The name for this one will be Kirby Cove. I'll just use this image here, which is one that I took a few nights ago. Totally shameless plug. Nothing you can do about it. So I'm going to copy that, paste that here, and just put blah, blah, blah. Autocomplete. Thank you, Chrome. Click submit. All right, so we have this here on Heroku, and I refresh. I have the same Kirby Cove created here locally. So it's not even about catastrophic events when a developer could accidentally delete the entire database. Let's say I wanted to test a feature. I wanted to know, is delete working? Are my delete routes working? Well, if I go in here and if I deleted something, which I'm not signed in, but if I did delete this, I'm also deleting it from production, which means that I'm deleting someone's actual data, which is never good. So it's really a good idea to have separate databases. So one way of fixing this problem is just to go back to Cloud9 and just on Cloud9 switch what we're using here, so that we're now using the YelpCamp localhost version. I can save, restart the server here, and now on Cloud9, if I refresh, you'll see that we're using the old version, or what we were using before, the local version. And on Heroku, we're still using the Mongo Lab instance because right now they're out of sync. We have changes that we made locally on Cloud9 that we haven't pushed to Heroku. And this is fine, this will work, it's valid, but it's kind of annoying because if I do want to, let's say I added a new feature, I changed the CSS, and I want to update that on Heroku, well then I'm going to have to figure out what I'm going to do about our database URL. I'm going to have to comment this out, comment that, or recomment or uncomment that one, save, add, commit all of that, push it to Heroku, and then if I want to add a new feature locally again or test something out, I comment that and uncomment this, and it's really not a good solution at all. However, there is another solution or another approach that we can take, and basically what we're going to do is write some code that says if we're in production, run or set the database URL to this. Otherwise, set it to be this here. Now, it's not actually going to be an if-else statement, and we're not technically checking if we're in production, if we're on Heroku. It's a little bit different. What we're going to do is make use of something called environment variables. So we've seen them before, this little line right here, which we've used in every Express app. process.env.port, process.env.ip. So what this means right here, and I went over this briefly, but I think it will make a little more sense now that you have some more experience under your belt. What this refers to is the environment where this code is being run. So process.env.port on Cloud 9 may be different than process.env.port on Heroku. It probably is. IP definitely is. So these are ways of adding variables that are not hard-coded, things that change based off of the environment they're being run in. So we could have put something like 80 here, but of course that's hard-coded, that's not dynamic. This allows us to have variables that respond to the environment. And in Node, in JavaScript, well, actually just in Node, they always start with process.env, that's how you access them, and then the name of the variable. So what we're going to do here is have an environment variable that we'll call database URL. And on Heroku, we're going to set database URL to be this long thing here. And then all we'll have to do is basically write process.env.database URL. And that will refer to the correct URL for our given environment. And then we'll do the same thing here where we'll set on Cloud 9 database URL to be mongodb://localhost/yelpcamp v10. So again, the idea is that we can create an environment variable, which I haven't shown you how to do. This is just how you access them. But remember, this is coming from outside of this application. This is coming from the actual application, the actual environment, the server that we're running the code on. So to demonstrate how we make this work, I'm going to start by going over here, closing out, and I'm going to create a new environment variable in the command line in the environment. I'm going to type export, which is a new command, and then I'm going to write my environment variable, which usually the convention is to do in all caps, as you can see here, IP, port. So we'll do database URL equals, and we're going to start by setting it equal to what we want to run on our Cloud 9 instance, what we want the database URL to be equal to. Just like that, and hit enter. To check if that worked, we're going to do this right here, actually, right here. Console.log process.env, and this needs to match database URL. And if we see this MongoDB : blah 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 localhost yelpcamp v10 spit back out or print it out, then we know that we've successfully set up the development database URL. So let's see what happens. Node app.js. There we go. See that it was printed out here. I never said print out localhost yelpcamp v10. I said the environment variable database URL. So now all we need to do is say mongoose.connect to process.env database URL. And then on Heroku, we'll need to go update database URL to be this MongoLab giant URL string, but we only want that to happen on Heroku. We want to leave this alone on Cloud 9. So let's just make sure it works though. Locally, so restart. Great. Let's go to our correct version here. Refresh, and we're still getting the local code. Heroku, of course, is unchanged because we haven't pushed any code to Heroku. So now, if we save this and add and commit, let's say update db URL git push Heroku master. If we try and run the Heroku version right now, as soon as this finishes at least, if I try and refresh this page, I'm going to have an error because Heroku or the server is not going to be able to find process.env.database URL because it's not set up. So just to show you that, refresh. It might take a bit, and I should get application error. And while that's going, oh, There we go, application error. Again, if you really want to know exactly what's happening, it's Heroku logs. And you can see here, I don't know how useful the error message that we get will be, honestly. Let's see. This might be one of those messages that doesn't tell you exactly what you would hope, but it's telling us MongoDB, there's an error. Yeah, so it doesn't explicitly mention that this database URL is a problem, because what's actually happening is that it's trying to connect to an empty string, most likely, which technically isn't a problem, except for the fact that there is no database located at the URL empty string. So it's sort of a unexpected error message. So I am telling you, though, that the problem is that we haven't set up that we haven't set up the environment variable on Heroku. So to do that, there's a few different ways we can do it. If we go to Heroku itself, I'll probably need to log back in here. I refresh the page. Nope, I didn't need to log back in. Here's our app. Well, if we go in and we go into settings, I believe it is, and then keep scrolling down, we go to config variables. We can add in a variable here. So we want database URL to be that giant string. I copied it and click add. And if we go back now, try refreshing the page, it works perfectly. Okay, so that's one way of doing it. I showed you how to go onto Heroku and add in key value pair. Database URL is the key or the name of the variable, the environment variable, and then a value. That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is through the command line. We can run a command. We can do this right here. I have the Node.js support docs open on Heroku. This line, Heroku config : set, and then key equals value. So I'll just copy this first bit. If we wanted to, I'm not going to actually do I'm not going to hit enter, but I just want to show you. It would be Heroku config : set, and then database URL equals, and then we would paste that URL. But I'm not going to do that. So another thing I haven't mentioned yet is that there's another good reason for using environment variables, which is that they're hidden. They're not exposed to whatever it is. Developers, if you put this code up on GitHub, we don't want to have our database URL right here. Of course, all of you already know my database URL, but this isn't obviously a real app. But if this was a real application, even if it's an open source application or parts of my code are open source, I don't want to be exposing my data or my database URL to everybody who looks at the code. So by having this line here, mongoose.connect process.env.database URL, that's no longer an issue. So that this is all that a developer would see, or anyone browsing the code on GitHub, and they would have to set up their own database URL in using environment variables. Okay, so let's recap what we did. We started by having the problem of one database for development and production, a shared database. To fix that, we set up our database URL environment variables locally on Cloud9 and on Heroku, two different values for the same variable. And then we access that variable, the environment variable, using process.env.database URL, and we connect to that. So we have two outcomes. One thing that I will mention is that it is worth setting up a default value. So let's say that I somehow screwed my app up. I restart my computer, or I don't know, I reset this workspace and my environment variable is gone. Or I'm sending this to someone and I want them to have, I don't know, a default database that they could use, just to make it so that the code doesn't completely break if I haven't explicitly set this up. What I can do is add in a little backup. So we'll make a variable and we'll just call it URL equals. And we're going to do process.env.database URL, or, and then we'll put some URL there. So let's do, what was our URL? I already lost it. There you are. So this will just be a backup. So again, what's happening here, this is not mandatory. It doesn't change the functionality, but if for some reason my environment variable got screwed up or it didn't exist, rather than breaking the code, what will happen is that this URL variable is going to be equal to the environment variable if it exists. If that's an empty string though, or if it doesn't exist, then it's going to be equal to this, which is just our backup. In this case, on Cloud9, they're the exact same thing. It's really not mandatory. Again, it's just kind of a good practice to have in case something went wrong. But really, I'm just showing it to you because it's pretty common to see this as well. Okay, so kind of long-winded, I know, circuitous way of approaching this, but it all boils down to the fact that we want different databases. Process.env.database URL is how we access environment variables from a Node app. I do want to make it clear, though, environment variables are not a Node thing or a JavaScript thing. Ruby applications, Rails applications, Python apps, they all can access environment variables, and they look relatively similar to this. It just happens that in Node, you write process.env. In other languages like Ruby, you'll often see something like env database URL. So it is a universal concept. It's not a Node-specific thing, and it's universal across all sorts of applications as well. You don't just use this for database URLs. You'll use it anytime you want to. Well, it looks like I have a typo here, by the way. It should be localhost. You use this anytime you want to have different information between your different environments, development or production. You also use this when you want to hide or obscure information from someone on GitHub, for instance. So if you had your PayPal or your Stripe credit card processing API information inside of your application because you needed it for the code, well, if you want to share your code on GitHub, you obviously don't want to be pushing that up. So what you can do is create an environment variable and do something like process.env.supersensitive information. And that's a way to get around that problem of wanting to share your code, make it public, but also not wanting to share your super sensitive information where someone could take your API key and run up a bill of thousands and thousands of dollars, which actually happens. Some of the bigger companies are much better about policing that. So Amazon, for instance, if you have your Amazon API key or your AWS information, your Amazon Web Services information on GitHub, they actually will know, and they'll send you a message saying you need to take this down immediately. We're going to disable it. Someone could charge thousands and thousands of dollars to this. They could use your account to run up a huge bill that they don't have to pay. Happens relatively often. I've heard of some students having that problem. None of mine, I promise, but definitely have heard of that before. All right, so process env is how we access environment variables. We have two databases set up. Yelp Campus now deployed. Two different databases. They don't share any information, which is how we want it. Awesome.